Hello, and welcome to the Career Compass program, which includes online learning sessions, podcasts, videos, webinars, white papers, and whiteboard videos, all specifically designed for NAVFAC. Please check the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, often for updates and new content to support your learning. This content will assist with learning and development within the 20 non-technical competencies outlined in the Workforce Development Strategy. Today's topic is data management, the storytelling method, in support of the technology and data management competency. Throughout this video, you will see a paper pencil icon on some slides indicating a workbook activity. When you see this icon on the top left corner, this means I'll be asking you to write something in your workbook or refer to your workbook. Please download the workbook from the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, before continuing with this course. In this video, we will discuss three main things: how you can organize data to support the data storytelling approach, how you can apply the elements of effective data storytelling and know when to use them, and how to craft a data storytelling presentation using the data storytelling techniques and steps. If you practice these methods, you'll make better, more persuasive presentations. Your goal, after all, isn't to impress anyone with your knowledge of data, statistics, and fancy charts. It's to use data to get your points across as efficiently and effectively as possible. In other words, gain trust and credibility by making your audience feel smart, not by showing how smart you are. Please note that the data used in all slides marked notional data is not actual Navy data, but is used for illustrative purposes only. But let's get started with a few questions for you. Please pause the video to look at this chart. Ask yourself, what does it tell me? What is its purpose? Why is it organized the way it is? How much work do I have to do to pull anything useful from it? How could the data be presented in a better, simpler way? Write your thoughts and observations in your workbook. Resume the video when you are ready. There are quite a few things wrong with it, in fact, but maybe the biggest thing is it forces you to keep looking from bar to bar to get a sense of the size of assets and their location. As is illustrated here, order the chart to make it easier to follow. By arranging the chart from highest to lowest value, or vice versa, makes it easy for the viewer to compare. In this case, though, the best approach might just be a raw table in order of descending value. That way, the user isn't forced to check the vertical axis to estimate the value of the assets. Again, the data used in this example is not actual Navy data. Be aware, too, that though the notion of storytelling sometimes suggests making up tales, in the case of data storytelling, you should always remain firmly in the realm of nonfiction. It is easy to withhold data and to misuse scales and ranges on charts to falsely emphasize your points. We see this all the time. Be wary of it. Check the X and Y axis to make sure that scales are consistent. Ask yourself why a date range might start and end where it does. Be skeptical and never fall into the same traps yourself when presenting your own data. In this real case, the media picked up on the data that suggests a rather steep decline in Nobel Prizes for American scientists beginning in the 1960s. They used it to raise alarms around the failings of STEM education in American schools. Pause the course now and really look at the chart. What is amiss? Write your observations in your workbook. Resume the video when you are ready. In the previous chart, the presenter used a 10-year scale from 1910 to 1970 and then suddenly a 4-year scale from 1971 to 1974. The chart was originally published by a scientific foundation in 1976. It goes to show how mistakes like this are often made even by researchers and scientists. In most cases, if you start with a certain scale, like 10 years in this case, stay with it. The researchers didn't have 10 years of data to report in 1976 when they published the chart. The latest data was probably from 1974, so they should have given the chart a consistent 4-year scale or even used a chart with fluctuating rates per decade to show a real trend. Maybe that would have shown regular fluctuations within the decades, making the period 1971 to 1974 not seem like a worrisome trend. In fact, by 1980, the trend had reversed itself, as you can see in the chart. This is a course about storytelling. We're going to cover a fair bit, but when was the last time you watched a movie or read a novel that told you the plot up front? An exciting trailer or introduction to your course is one thing. A traditional agenda probably detracts from your story. Consider throwing away the agenda and get right to the important stuff. There are 4 different steps in the data storytelling process that lead to the best delivery of your information. The first 2 steps, identify your purpose and know your audience, relate to the pre-processing and planning of your visual. The second 2 relate to the presentation and physical appearance of your visual. The first step, identify your purpose, seems intuitive, but people often take it for granted and move right into design. Is the presentation intended to inform decision-making? Is it for information only? Is it in support of strategic planning? Knowing the purpose of the data helps you to narrow down the options in how to communicate it. The second step, knowing your audience, does the same thing. It helps you narrow down the options in how to best communicate your data. The seniority, size, and knowledge of your audience matters. For example, a smaller group will most likely warrant including more detail. For larger audiences, you want to make sure the person with the least background can still understand what is happening. For a senior audience, you might focus more on the bigger picture than the details. In all cases, your visuals alone should tell the story. The fewer questions you get to clarify your charts, the better you've done telling the story clearly with your visuals. The third step contains the golden rule. Keep it simple. Fancy visuals like the one on the slide are impressive. They might look good and can even draw you in. These charts and tables might be useful for a very select and familiar audience that has sufficient time to study it and read the article that went with it. Charts like this might work well, too, for a recurring audience, one that has seen and used the chart and tables many times, and you are simply keeping them up to date, for example, as a dashboard. But the first thing an unfamiliar audience should gather from your visual is the answer to your overall question and purpose, your key message. Here, you don't really know where to look, and you can't really decipher the main point, at least not without studying the charts and tables for some time. Only use text where necessary and to support the message of the graph. Stick to no more than 8 distinct colors or labels. Avoid backgrounds, images, and symbols that don't support the data in any way. The bulk of the lesson is here, in design. Your key message should stand in the foreground of your visual. Any text on the screen should be legible and concise. Make an audience-friendly chart. Center things and have a balance of content and blank space. Reducing clutter is a key part of keeping it simple. People are predictable. The first time someone views a graphic, their eyes will probably follow closely to either an F or Z pattern. Try to cater your layout and design such that all the critical information is identified in these scanning patterns. Even if it's just arranging things on a slide, alignment is critical to bring out the focus. When you lay out your visual, be mindful of keeping a logical pattern. By choosing the right visuals, you emphasize the story told by the data. For example, if you spot a trend, the scale of your bar graph can either disguise the trend or emphasize it. If the story is the trend, emphasize it. When you want to persuade, think about borrowing from good storytelling techniques that aim to ignite interest through drama. This is sometimes referred to as dramaturgy, which simply refers to how a story is composed to create audience interest and engagement. In the same vein, use visuals that evoke emotion where possible and appropriate. Your first goal, however, isn't to impress with graphics. It is to draw attention to your most salient points in the clearest, simplest way possible. In many cases, to support better decision-making. This type of visualization tells a powerful story. Every summer in the US, there's a shark attack or two, or even several. The reports invariably tell the story of a swimmer or surfer attacked out of nowhere. Details about the victim's injuries follow, as might quotes from a distraught family member. Alligator, snake, and spider bites get the same attention partly due to the natural horror of being eaten or snake bit. Reporters know what they're doing. These reports almost always involve individuals and compelling narratives. They stand out, they move from the rational realm to the emotional, making them far more powerful, memorable, and these days, shareable. We hear less about deaths caused by cows, dogs, and insects, even though they claim far more victims each year in the US. Rationally, we all know that driving is one of the most dangerous things we do, but road deaths and injuries are so common that the only news we often get of them involves large pileups or annual statistics. Big, impersonal numbers don't have an emotional impact. It is often better to combine them with case examples where a person or family's story illustrates the broader statistic. Here, if you want to alleviate people's fear of enjoying the ocean, it helps to contrast the near impossible chances of experiencing a shark attack versus the real relative dangers of driving to work each day. Using a visual like this, you might get people thinking about how they ignore the threat of dogs, wasps, and cars, even though those things are more dangerous, yet they allow shark and alligator attacks to worry them disproportionately. Of course, this is a simplification. A person who almost never drives but surfs in Shark Alley every day will have different odds, but the general point remains. Complex visuals may look nice, but the danger in choosing form over function is a confused audience who may either ask a lot of questions or leave with the wrong takeaways. This might lead to delayed decisions or even bad decisions. And for you, people might admire your artistic skills, but find you less credible when it comes to your data. Even when you choose a reasonably simple chart and present consistent scales, you might still miss the mark. Here you want to show, perhaps, that COVID-19 drove costs up for NAVFAC and the Navy. This chart does that, but not as impactfully as it could. Recall that in most cases, changing the scale of a slide is a bad practice because it can mislead. In this case, though, partial year data for 2021 is used and is appropriate. Why? Because in this case, it does not mislead. By showing the most recent data, you illustrate your key argument, which is the fact that even though COVID began in early 2020, its impact on the design, build, supply chain, and associated costs was mostly felt beginning in 2021. If you were using these charts to argue the existence of a long-term upward trend in design, build costs, your argument would be flawed, but because you are using it for comparative purposes, you may, and must, in this case, use partial year data. Notice also that data from before 2015 has been removed. Why? Because that data is not really relevant to your purpose. Again, you're not discussing long-term trends. You're only trying to contrast today's design build costs with recent averages. You need a few years of data to show the contrast with COVID-19, but not 40 years worth. Here, scale to yearly and then add the data you have so far for 2021. Yes, things might change by the end of the year, but again, your purpose here is not so much to compare 2015 to 2021, but to show the dramatic impact of COVID-19 on land and building costs over the past year or so, and especially now. By changing the scale and adding up-to-date data from 2021, your visuals tell a much stronger and more accurate story. Each of these graphs works, and you might show more than one. But the one in the bottom right might show the COVID spike most effectively because visually, it shows the spike using a combined line graph, which contrasts and stands out better than bars alone in the chart on the left. The line graph in the upper right works too, but it is somewhat confusing. It pushes the boundary of a maximum 4 lines in a line chart and provides less contrast and impact. So let's go through a hypothetical example. You are asked to present the pros and cons of 3 options for locating a new Navy R&D facility. Your audience is the CNO and their team, who have narrowed the choice to 3, and who must make a decision involving hundreds of millions of dollars. In this simplified example, they've asked you to compare and contrast 3 variables for constructing a 70,000 square foot facility on 500 acres of industrial land: the cost of land, the cost of building, and the costs of environmental protection compliance. Remember the 4 steps of data and storytelling. Before you start collecting and analyzing data, make sure the purpose is clear and that you know who will be in the audience and what they're looking for. In your workbook, add your thoughts around purpose and audience expectations based on what you know. Pause the video and resume when you are ready. To understand the purpose, you might confer with colleagues, speak with the CNO's aides and your own leadership, but from the details you have, it appears that the CNO team has boiled the options for a new Navy R&D facility down to 3. How they arrived at the 3 is probably irrelevant to your task, but from the instructions, you know that they are interested in costs. The main purpose of your presentation then is to lay out the comparative costs of land, construction, and cleanup. As for the audience, the request has come from the CNO team. You'll be presenting to them and perhaps several other very senior Navy leaders. Have you presented to this group before? If not, can you confer with colleagues who have? Perhaps the CNO has a preferred style or sequence, such as frequent interruptions with questions, or to wait until the end. Are more or fewer details preferable? Knowing the purpose of the presentation and your audience, you're able to identify and hopefully collect the data you need. Here is some sample data for illustrative purposes only. This is data you could use for your next steps in this exercise and is also available in your workbook. As you go through data, sort it, and analyze it, you will start to see patterns and a story will form. Again, this is made up sample data for illustrative purposes only. It helps to script your narrative. Write it out like a story you might tell orally, even without slides. Remember, keep it simple. In your workbook, craft a simple narrative based on what you know. Take license with the sample data. The goal is not to produce an accurate chart at this stage, but to tell a story. Pause the video and resume when you are ready. You may have found a different narrative, but one story the data suggests is that either location A or B is the best choice. But closer analysis suggests that both of those locations, for whatever reason, are experiencing steady inflation in land and build costs. COVID may have caused prices to spike in all 3 locations, but even though location C starts out more expensive than the others, its prices, except for the COVID spike, are stable. Land prices in location C are even projected to decline through 2025. Maybe locations A and B are growing in population and business starts, where C is declining. Look into the probable causes in case questions arise, but keep them as a sidebar to your main story. In other words, avoid clutter by leaving them off your slides. Having analyzed the data and knowing the purpose of your presentation and the audience, how can you tell a compelling and honest story in the simplest way possible? Again, the main story may be that location C is more expensive right now, but very likely to be the best option in terms of costs over the next few years, and if so, probably represents the best choice for the Navy given that it normally takes a year or 2 before land is purchased and construction begins. That is the CNO's choice, but by emphasizing the important storyline, you support the decision rather than obfuscating it. This is where you select the visuals, charts, and so on that portray the data in the cleanest, clearest way possible. The chart here is simple and easy to follow, but does the scale and presentation tell the story? Do the differences between the choices stand out, or do they look about the same? By adding additional visuals with a slightly different view of the data, you might make a clearer and stronger point. Here, it's easier to see that options A and B seem to be escalating in cost rapidly over the past decade or so, while option C is stable and is even projected to decrease in cost through 2025 because industrial land costs are declining in the area. You will have made your projections using various analytical techniques. Depending on the audience, there is likely no need to show that in your presentation. Questions will arise, however, so have a simple narrative explanation ready that describes your process, including assumptions, sources, and any weaknesses. Think about other ways you could communicate the data visually to draw attention to the main storyline. We've looked at some basic examples here. Your data and visualizations are likely to be more complex. However, the principles don't change. Use the steps in storytelling: purpose, audience, simplicity, and visuals to build simple, clear, and compelling presentations with your data. We hope you will practice applying these techniques using this real-life NavFac example, which can also be found in your workbook. By way of context, in this scenario, the press is only reporting that radioactive material was found on the former Naval Air Station. Congressional and Senate offices are fielding hundreds of phone calls from neighboring residents. The chief asks you to come up with the simplest communication that shows residents they have nothing to worry about. How would you use data visualization and storytelling to make a simple, persuasive argument that the average person will understand? Here is a chart that will guide you to selecting the correct graphic for your data based on your broader purpose. It can also be found in your workbook. Here is another great resource to help you in identifying your purpose. It's a bit more abstract than the previous chart. Again, it is available to you in the workbook. Today, we talked about how to organize data to support the data storytelling approach, how to apply the basic elements of effective data storytelling, and how to craft a data storytelling presentation using the data storytelling techniques and steps. Consider the NavFac example regarding radiological material. How would you tell this story with data? Write your thoughts and observations in your workbook. Pause the video and resume when you are ready. What are your stories you want to be able to tell? Use what you learned here today to successfully tell your stories with data. Again, thank you for watching this video. We hope that you gleaned useful and helpful information. If you have any questions, please contact your local BD17 representative or contact Headquarters BD17 at NAVFAC HQ, Total Force Development at Navy.mil. Be sure to follow the instructions on this page to submit your self-certification for this course. Or if you have a smartphone, you can scan in the QR code to generate the email with all the necessary information for self-certification. The QR code can be found in your workbook as well. Again, thank you for participating today.